Now, President of the African Development Bank Group, that's Dr. Akinwumi Adesina, has called for a change of name from the Federal Republic of Nigeria to the United States of Nigeria. He explained that a change to the United States of Nigeria would change the relational mindset between the states and Abuja, stating that the fulcrum would be the states while the center would support them, not lord over them. Arise News analyst, that's Dr. Sam Amadi, joins us now to discuss the proposal by the AFDB boss on how to ensure Nigeria's development through the change of the nation's name. Good afternoon, Dr. Amadi. Good to have you on Newsday.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Now, some might say or ask, what's in a name? I'm just wondering, what's your assessment of the potential benefits or drawbacks when it comes to a country's name change as a strategy for economic and social development?
Well, it says, what is a name? That which is called Rose by other name could have been the same. But at the same time, we know that sometimes names encode lessons, history, and also have some kind of psychic and maybe symbolic realignment. So many countries change their name, usually to reflect a new reality, especially colonial names. So names that were imposed on them, they now change to more indigenous, more homogeneous names. But in this case, Niger area, chosen for us by the concubine or the wife or the girlfriend or mistress of Lord Lugard. The question is, why change the name? Does it reflect, are we not going to go to a name, Wazobia, or a name that is more indigenous to Nigerian people? That's one instance which a name could mean something. Again, after fighting through a revolutionary struggle, many states in the world changed names to reflect the new reality, that the imperial, and then they got independence, and they changed their name. So you had maybe Gold Coast to Ghana, and several other countries in the world. So in this particular instance of the United States of Nigeria, I don't think it carries that level of cultural resonance that could trigger a new wave of patriotism, nationalism, could trigger some kind of authenticity. The name is so prosaic, United States of Nigeria. So this is one instance where the name suggested does not embody a transformative potential. It's too dry, okay. Now, but the key point he makes around restructuring is one that does make some sense. Clearly, economic development scholars, everybody now agrees that institutions have bearing on economic and social development. And institutions themselves are not just, could be in terms of structure, and then what to call meta-institution, the bigger institutions of the state. That's why we're talking about moving from presidential to parliamentary. So the big institutions define development. Also the small institutions, rule of law, the relationship between the executive and legislature. But more important, I think, is the notion that the center, there's so much sucking up of energy from the rural to urban migration, from states origin to the center. And so what you're seeing across Nigeria is that three things working together. One, the structural crisis means that at the local level, there's no economy, no governance. State governors colonize, manipulate, concentrate, and take over, responsibilities and resources that match them. And that desensitizes the local level from dealing with the democracy. And this is actually very important. Elsewhere, democracy evolves from, city-states, from town unions, small areas, and move to the bigger level. So you start with town halls in the US, then you move to maybe districts, they get to states themselves who came together to form a federation. And that's why you hear the United States of America, it tells a story, a historical story, that actually those states were first so sovereign, and then they came together to create a federation. In our own case, we are a federation that is now trying to go back to states. So the notion of the US and its historical meaning, United States, is different from ours. These are states that were sovereign, they had the confederacy, 13 of them, they now came together to form a more perfect union, bring themselves together. Okay. In our own case, we are a construction that's centralized. So if you're going to say, let's go to region, it makes sense. So I support restructuring as long as we understand that it means creating more democratization, more responsibility at local level, and then matching revenue, fiscal policy to problem solving at local level. It's correct, but the name change might be too superficial. Yeah.
All right. I'm glad you landed by saying the name change might be too superficial, because, of course, this is all part of the ongoing conversation about restructuring. Now, my question to you is, if we take this conversation in a rebranding direction, do you think it'll become more palatable for people? Do you think that if we talk of restructuring as a rebrand, it's just nomenclature, but do you think that people might buy in more into the conversation? Or is this... is this conversation in futility? What's the importance of rebranding? If you think there's any importance at all, that is.
I think it's a good point. I think it's a good point about rebranding. By the way, under Yaradua, there was a committee called Committee to Rebrand Nigeria, and Dora Konyele, brought the idea. I happen to be a member of that committee. The notion was to create a moment to change Nigeria's nomenclature, changing Nigeria as a country by rebranding, and that means cities are branded, nations are branded. If you look at, for example, if you talk about Dubai today, people have an idea of a working place, a world shopping mall. Now they're moving to conferences, so they rebrand themselves. You rebrand yourself both by name, by word, by the things you emphasize. But again, back to the narrative. I think it's important that restructuring has got stuck in undertones. That's the problem with narratives. The narrative of South against North, the narrative of those with physical, those who have resources wanting to colonize and control more resources than those who seemingly don't have plagued restructuring. So we might look for a different name. We might look at, maybe we change the name, it makes sense, nomenclature. But again, we also play up that it's a win-win. Because of the history of competition in Nigerian politics, everything gets played into this competition between Muslim, Christian, North, South, and so on, Yoruba, Igbo, Fulani, Hausa. But that destroys the real issue. And so we need narrators who will come and say, look, this is all about, for example, solving the crisis of cattle rustling in Zamfara or Kaduna or Katsina. Requires a government that at the local level has all the plenary powers to take action, to manage resources, to deal with law enforcement. That it's also about the fact that they have mineral resources in Niger, in all these places. They need sub-national governments with the fiscal incentive to invest not just technology or finance, but knowledge and time to develop those resources for themselves. So we need to start restructuring the language itself, the communication, and begin to show people that actually this is actually win-win. In fact, this is actually more win for some of those so-called, backward or so-called northern states that actually would do far better in a structure. And let's leave the language restructuring. Let's talk about governance reform. Let's talk about reconceptualizing Nigeria, as Shoyinka once said. The notion of what's this state all about? Why should government be extractive instead of productive? Shouldn't government be about increasing, enhancing value creation? So I think we are stuck now in this structure, and people are over-invested in the fact that once we regionalize, once we give all the powers to Imo State, for example, my own state, I mean, what's the guarantee that if you take the power the federal government is not using well and give to the state, that the states will use better? State police, there's a fundamental crisis around the concept of policing. In the colonial era, the police was a force to suppress the people. That DNA is still working. So you can't talk about, state police without dealing with the reconceptualization of policing.
Well said, Dr. Amadi. Now, speaking of, numbers,
yes.
The cost, how would you quantify the potential economic cost that could be associated with this national rebranding exercise if it ever sees the light of day? And that, of course, includes updating legal documents, international treaties, and probably reissuing identification documents. Is it worth it?
I don't think it's worth it to change Nigeria. I think we should start by dealing with the low-hanging fruits. First, we have a local government system that's not working. The 1974 Act is clear. The local government should do most of the things that states and federal is doing. So get back through the constitutional process, local government authorize it. That's number one. Number two, the constitutional conference is going on now. Boldly relocate responsibilities. Number three, you have the constitutional conference report, which you can debate around it, but a few things are central. Do those things, and then you can now, and by the way, we should be creating committees to do these things. Rebranding in today's world is about three things. One, the stories you tell about yourself. Two, the work you do in terms of economic development. If you're a growing economy, you are rebranded. Singapore, when they broke away from India, Taiwan, and Singapore, Malaysia, these countries broke away, and they were seen as poor. But today, through economic development, they are rebranded. Look at South Korea. When it was under Japan, it was seen as a dead zone. Today, what about China? China was like the poor continent, like a country. From 78, Deng changed everything. Today, the people want to learn Chinese language. People are thinking about benchmarking the economies to Chinese currency. So rebranding is not about getting a committee and putting money. It's actually about gradually but systematically increasing your capability and deliveries, increasing your achievements, economic, social development, and then weaving a new story. And start with leadership. Look, if Nigerian leaders begin to speak a new story about Nigeria, think about the Fly Nigeria, the Air Peace. If they sustain their operations and then they move across Nigeria to Ghana, they become the airline of choice of the West African sub-region to Europe and America. Nigeria's story changes overnight. That's rebranded. They begin to see Nigeria now as an aviation hub, a power. So the notion that the changes require that you have a committee changing them, those are maybe symbolic but have little value. Like I said, the United States of Nigeria with this current system doesn't really speak to anything. In the US, it makes sense because the states came to before the federation. In Nigeria, the rebranding should focus on restructuring at the level that's not problematic, at the level of enhancing local effectiveness, local economy, local accountability. Look, if you make local government work as it ought to do, as a site for learning democracy, for getting people elected, not on party basis, but based on real democracy. Even in China, for example, the local side of China is democratic. At the upper level, meritocratic. So there are things we can do today that we don't need to change the name to, to United States of Nigeria or to Wazobia Republic, but the impact in a short time will be massive. And the world will now say, well, this is a new country, this is a new Nigeria. Right. Because we can see its coherence, we can see it's organized better, leadership, we can see economic growth happening. And Nigeria is taking lead in many ways, and that is the real rebranding that matters.
The growing call for a change of name is needless. As we've just heard from Dr. Sam Ahmadi, Nigeria's problem isn't in what it's called, but in how it's governed. Renaming the country to the United States of Nigeria may sound like a bold, symbolic gesture, but it does nothing to address the deeper structural failures holding us back. Dr. Ahmadi rightly pointed out that such a name doesn't even reflect our historical journey or the political realities that define us today. A cosmetic change like this might excite headlines, but it won't fix broken institutions or bring power closer to the people. What Nigeria needs is not a new label, it's restructuring. We need a return to regional government, where each region has the autonomy to manage its own resources, security, and development priorities. The current centralized system has stifled progress, deepened division, and left many parts of the country feeling disconnected from governance. If we want real change, we must shift from symbolic gestures to meaningful reforms. Let's fix the foundation, not just the name.